After 10 years caring for Grandma while my sister ignored her, I inherited everything. Dad slammed the table. Deed it to your sister or you're disowned. I just smiled and pulled out the secret letter. Have you ever sat at a dinner table, looked around at the people passing you the mashed potatoes, and realized they are just waiting for the right moment to bleed you dry? If you haven't, consider yourself lucky. For me, that realization didn't come in a single, earth-shattering moment. It was a slow drip, a steady poison that built up over 28 years of being the invisible daughter. I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my tiny studio apartment, smoothing down the front of my modest black dress. It was a cheap dress, bought off the rack at a discount store 3 years ago, but it was clean and pressed. Today was the day we were burying Grandma Odette. As I pinned my hair back, my phone buzzed on the counter. It was a text from my mother, Helena. It didn't ask how I was holding up. It didn't offer to pick me up. It just read, "Make sure you bring the extra folding chairs from your place. Gia is bringing some friends and we need seating." Gia. My 31-year-old sister. The golden child. The center of my parents' universe, a black hole that swallowed all their time, money, and affection, leaving absolutely nothing for anyone else. When I arrived at the cemetery, the humidity of the late summer afternoon was thick and suffocating. The grass was a vibrant, almost offensive green against the dark mahogany of Grandma's casket. I parked my used sedan far away from the main tent and walked over carrying the 2 heavy folding chairs. I spotted my family immediately. My father, Donovan, was standing tall in his expensive tailored suit, his hand resting protectively on Gia's shoulder. Gia hadn't bothered to wear a proper dress. She wore designer black jeans with a customized slit at the knee, a cropped silk blouse, and massive, oversized sunglasses that covered half her face. She was complaining loudly about the heat, fanning herself with the memorial program. Mom was hovering around her like an anxious bee, offering her a bottle of imported water. "Drink up, sweetie," Mom cooed, her voice carrying over the quiet murmurs of the other guests. "I know this is so traumatizing for your anxiety." Traumatizing for her anxiety. I almost laughed out loud. Gia hadn't visited Grandma Odette in over 3 years. The closest she got to caring for our grandmother was occasionally sending a generic heart emoji on the family group chat when I would post updates about Grandma's doctor appointments. Yet here she was, playing the role of the devastated, fragile granddaughter. I walked up and quietly set the chairs down. Dad barely glanced at me. "You're late, Nadia," he muttered, checking his silver watch. "Try to show some respect." I didn't argue. I just took my place at the back of the small crowd, letting the familiar cloak of invisibility wrap around me. I was what therapists call a glass child. The sibling whose needs are entirely overlooked because the parents are so hyper-focused on the other child's supposed vulnerabilities or demands. You learn to make yourself small. You learn to solve your own problems. You learn to stop asking for help because the answer is always a lecture about how selfish you are for distracting them from your sibling. As the priest began his sermon, droning on about ashes and dust, my mind drifted away from the cemetery. They all thought I was standing there, silent and stoic, because I was trying to hold back tears. They thought I was just processing the grief of losing the only person in this family who actually saw me. But they were wrong. I wasn't crying. I was planning. My eyes locked onto the polished wood of the casket, and my mind flashed back to 48 hours ago. The dim light of the intensive care unit. The steady, rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. The smell of antiseptic and old paper. Grandma Odette had gripped my hand with a strength that defied her failing body. She pulled me close, her breath smelling faintly of peppermint and medicine. She didn't give me a sweet, movie-style goodbye. Grandma Odette was a sharp, pragmatic woman who saw the world exactly as it was. She looked me dead in the eye, her voice barely a whisper, but laced with a terrifying clarity. "They think I'm leaving it all to your father," she had rasped, coughing weakly. "They think I don't know what they've done to you. But I see them, Nadia. I've always seen them. The trap is set. Let them dig their own graves." The memory sent a shiver down my spine despite the sweltering heat. I watched my sister dab at her dry eyes under her designer sunglasses, while my father patted her back. They thought I was going to cry at the funeral today. But they had no idea what Grandma Odette had told me the night before her heart stopped. To understand the absolute audacity of what my parents were about to do, you have to understand the foundation our family was built on. It wasn't built on love, or mutual respect, or even basic fairness. It was built on a financial and emotional hierarchy where Gia was the undisputed queen, and I was the peasant expected to pay the taxes. It started becoming incredibly obvious when I was 20 years old. I was a sophomore in college, attending a local community school to save money, working a minimum wage shift at a diner every night until 2 in the morning. Every single dollar I made went into a savings account for my textbooks and a future transfer to a university. I smelled like old grease and cheap coffee constantly, but I was proud. I had $1,200 saved up. It was my lifeline. Gia was 23 at the time. She had dropped out of a private arts college after 2 semesters because the professors didn't understand her creative vision. Instead of making her get a job, my father, Donovan, bought her a brand new, mid-tier luxury sedan. He said she needed reliable transportation to go to job interviews. She used it to drive to parties 2 towns over. I'll never forget that Tuesday night in November. I had just gotten home from a brutal double shift. My feet were throbbing, and I was standing in the kitchen eating a piece of cold toast over the sink. The front door banged open. Gia stumbled in, reeking of cheap tequila and sour perfume, crying hysterically. My parents rushed out of their bedroom in their robes. She had crashed the car. Not just a fender bender. She had driven it straight into a parked delivery truck, completely totaling the front end. Miraculously, she wasn't hurt, and the police hadn't been called because she had panicked and driven the crumpled mess home before the engine totally died in our driveway. The next morning, the reality of the situation hit. The insurance deductible was massive, and the driver of the delivery truck was threatening a civil suit for the damages and lost wages. My parents were in a sheer panic. They had already maxed out their credit cards funding Gia's failed college stint and her endless wardrobe. That evening, they cornered me in the living room. "Nadia," my father started, his voice adopting that low, authoritative tone he only used when he wanted something. "Your sister made a mistake. A big one. The legal fees to settle this before it goes to court are going to drown us." I just stared at him, holding my worn-out backpack. "What does that have to do with me?" I asked, though my stomach was already tying itself in knots. My mother, Helena, immediately started crying. It was her go-to weapon. "How can you be so cold?" she sobbed into a tissue. "Your sister is terrified. She could go to jail. We are a family. Family helps family." Then came the demand. Dad knew about my savings account. He demanded I transfer the $1,200 to his account immediately to help cover the retainer for the lawyer. "That's for my textbooks," I said, my voice shaking. "If I don't buy the access codes, I fail my classes. I'll lose my financial aid." Gia, who was draped over the sofa like a tragic Victorian heroine, sniffled loudly. "I can't believe you care more about some stupid books than my life," she whined. The argument lasted for 2 hours. It was a masterclass in psychological abuse. Dad threatened to kick me out of the house if I didn't contribute to the household. Mom accused me of being jealous of Gia, claiming I wanted to see her fail because I was bitter about going to community college. They gaslit me until I didn't know which way was up. They convinced me that if our family fell apart, it would be entirely my fault for hoarding my little waitress tips. Broken, exhausted, and terrified of being homeless, I logged into my banking app on my phone. My hands trembled as I typed in the amount. $1,200. Poof. Gone. 6 months of smelling like deep fryer grease, erased in an instant to save my sister from the consequences of her own drunk driving. I didn't get a thank you. Dad just nodded sharply, and Mom went back to stroking Gia's hair. I walked upstairs to my room, shut the door, and sat on the floor in the dark. I didn't cry. The tears wouldn't come. Instead, something inside me just snapped. It hardened into something cold and impenetrable. I gave them the money. I found a second job data entering overnight to pay for my books, sleeping barely 3 hours a day. But that Tuesday night was the exact moment the obedient daughter they knew died. And the ruthless, calculating accountant they would eventually fear was born. That was the day I started keeping receipts. Literally and figuratively. While my parents' house was a war zone of manipulation and financial dread, my grandmother's house was my only sanctuary. 445 Sycamore Lane. It was a classic, mid-century ranch-style home with white siding, a sprawling front porch, and a backyard that felt like a secret forest. The catch was, Sycamore Lane was located 2 hours away from the city where I lived. By the time I was 24, I had finally moved out of my parents' house, sharing a cramped, drafty studio apartment with 2 other girls just to afford the rent. I was working my way up the corporate ladder at a mid-sized accounting firm, grinding 50 to 60 hours a week. I was perpetually exhausted, living off discount instant ramen and bulk coffee. But every single Sunday, without fail, I made the 2-hour drive to Sycamore Lane. Grandma Odette was getting older. Her arthritis was flaring up, making it hard for her to maintain the house she loved so much. Since my parents were always too busy managing Gia's latest crisis to check on her, the responsibility fell entirely on me. Not that I minded. I loved Grandma. She was the only person who asked how my day was and actually waited to hear the answer. I would arrive at 9 in the morning. I'd spend the first 2 hours doing the heavy cleaning, scrubbing the bathroom tiles, vacuuming the thick carpets, mopping the hardwood floors. Then I'd check her medications, organize her pillboxes for the week, and drive to the local grocery store to stock her fridge with fresh produce and meals I'd meal prep for her. I remember one specific Sunday in late October. The weather had turned violent. A massive rainstorm was pounding the region, turning the highways into dangerous slip-and-slides. The wooden steps leading up to Grandma's back porch had rotted through, and she had almost tripped the day before. I was out there in the freezing, torrential rain, wearing an oversized yellow poncho, hammering new, treated wooden planks into place. My hands were blistered, my boots were soaked through to my socks, and I was shivering uncontrollably. Grandma Odette opened the back door, holding a steaming mug of black tea. "Nadia, get inside this instant," she scolded, though her eyes were soft. "You're going to catch pneumonia over some stupid stairs." "Almost done, Grandma," I yelled over the thunder, securing the last nail. When I finally came inside, dripping wet and freezing, she wrapped a thick wool blanket around my shoulders and handed me the tea. We sat in her cozy living room, listening to the rain hammer against the glass. My phone lit up on the coffee table. It was an Instagram notification. Gia had just posted a new photo. I swiped the screen. There was my sister, wearing a plush white robe, holding a mimosa, posing on a balcony overlooking a stunning mountain range. The caption read, "Self-Care Sunday. So grateful for my amazing parents who gifted me this spa weekend to help me detox my negative energy. #blessed, #healing, #family." I stared at the screen. Dad had told me on Tuesday that things were incredibly tight and he couldn't afford to chip in for Grandma's expensive heart medication this month. I had paid for it out of my own pocket, pushing my credit card near its limit. Yet, he somehow had $1,000 to send his 31-year-old daughter to a luxury spa to detox. I must have gripped the phone too hard because my knuckles turned white. Grandma Odette leaned over and looked at the screen. She didn't say a word. She didn't gasp. She didn't curse them out. She just looked at the picture of Gia, then looked at my wet boots, my blistered hands, and the bags of groceries I had bought with my own hard-earned money. She calmly picked up her teacup, took a slow sip, and set it down. "Your father has always been a fool," she said quietly, her voice devoid of any warmth. "And your mother enables him. They think they are building a safety net for your sister. But all they are building is a trap." I didn't fully understand what she meant at the time. I just assumed she was venting her frustration. I thought we were just 2 women sitting in a storm, powerless against the blatant unfairness of our own family. But I underestimated her. Grandma Odette never yelled at my parents. She never confronted them about their hypocrisy or demanded they pay me back. She didn't have to. Instead, she spent the last 2 years of her life quietly building a legal guillotine, and she was waiting for the perfect moment to drop the blade. To fully grasp the sheer desperation behind my parents' actions after Grandma died, we have to rewind to 3 years ago. This was the era of Gia's most catastrophic financial disaster, the spiritual healing boutique. Gia, nearing her late 20s, decided she was tired of being unemployed. But instead of getting a normal job, she declared she had found her true calling. She was going to open a high-end boutique downtown selling imported healing crystals, organic sage bundles, and custom aura cleansing perfumes. I remember the family dinner where she pitched it. Dad sat at the head of the table, beaming with pride as Gia showed them a poorly designed slideshow on her laptop. She had no business plan, no market research, no supplier contracts, just a list of aesthetic vibes and an estimated startup cost of $80,000. I, being the financial manager I am, asked the logical questions. Have you looked at the foot traffic for that commercial lease? What are your projected profit margins? How will you handle inventory tax? Gia rolled her eyes, sighing heavily. God, Nadia, why do you always have to be so toxic and negative? This is about energy, not stupid spreadsheets. Mom immediately jumped to her defense. Nadia, stop trying to crush your sister's dreams just because you work a boring corporate job. We are going to support her. And support her they did. Since Dad didn't have $80,000 sitting in cash, he did the unthinkable. He remortgaged their family home. He took out a massive second loan, betting his entire retirement security on Gia's healing crystals. The boutique opened with a flashy launch party that cost another $5,000. I didn't go. I was busy reviewing tax audits at the firm. The business failed in exactly 6 months. It turned out that paying $5,000 a month in commercial rent to sell rocks you bought online at a markup wasn't a sustainable business model. Gia got bored. She stopped showing up to open the store, hired expensive part-time staff to run it for her, and bled the business accounts dry buying designer clothes to maintain her CEO aesthetic. When the boutique formally declared bankruptcy, the fallout was apocalyptic. Dad was suddenly saddled with a crushing monthly loan payment on top of his regular mortgage. Mom had to start selling her jewelry on local Facebook groups just to keep up appearances. But of course, none of it was Gia's fault. According to the family narrative, the economy was bad, the location was cursed, and the universe just had different timing for her. It was during this period of intense financial panic that my parents' eyes turned toward Sycamore Lane. I was at my parents' house one evening, forced to attend a tense family dinner. I had gotten up to use the restroom and was walking past my father's home office. The door was cracked open, and I heard hushed, urgent voices. "We're drowning, Helena," Dad hissed. "The second mortgage payment is due in 2 weeks and we are short. We can't keep pulling from the retirement fund. It's gone." "What about Odette's house?" Mom whispered back. Her voice was cold, calculating. "It's fully paid off. It has to be worth at least $500,000 in today's market. If we can get her to sign over the power of attorney." "She's getting frail," Dad agreed. "Her memory isn't what it used to be. I saw a brochure for a state-run assisted living facility a few towns over. It's cheap. If we transition her there, we can sell Sycamore Lane, clear our debts, and finally get Gia set up with a condo so she has some stability." My blood ran ice cold. I stood frozen in the hallway, listening to my parents plot to throw my grandmother into a low-income, state-run nursing home just so they could steal her house to pay off Gia's crystal shop debt. They thought Grandma Odette was losing her mind. They thought her quietness was senility. They thought I was just a silent drone who wouldn't intervene. I quietly stepped back, walked into the kitchen, and grabbed my coat. I didn't confront them. Confrontation gives the enemy time to prepare. Instead, I drove straight to Sycamore Lane. I sat down with Grandma Odette, poured 2 cups of tea, and told her every single word I had just heard. She didn't flinch. She just nodded, her jaw set tight. "Call Mr. Carmichael tomorrow morning," she instructed me, her voice sharp as glass. "Tell him I need to update my will. Urgently." The final month of Grandma Odette's life was a masterclass in physical exhaustion and emotional isolation. Her heart condition rapidly deteriorated, landing her in the intensive care unit. The doctors made it clear it was a matter of weeks, not months. The hospital became my second home. I would finish my shift at the accounting firm at 6 in the evening, grab a stale sandwich from a vending machine, and drive straight to the hospital. I would sit in that stiff, vinyl hospital chair until 3 or 4 in the morning, listening to the machine's beep, holding her thin, bruised hand, and watching her chest rise and fall. Then I would drive to my apartment, sleep for 3 hours, shower, and go back to work. I was running on pure adrenaline and caffeine. My eyes were bloodshot, I lost 10 pounds, and I felt like a walking ghost. Where was my family during this critical time? They were busy protecting Gia's peace. On the second week of Grandma being in the ICU, Dad called me. He didn't ask how Grandma was doing. He didn't ask how I was holding up. "Listen, Nadia," he said, sounding annoyed. "Stop sending updates about the hospital machines to the group chat. It's giving your sister severe panic attacks. The hospital environment drains her spiritual energy, and her therapist says she needs to protect her boundaries right now." "She's dying, Dad," I said, my voice hollow, echoing in the quiet hospital corridor. "Grandma is dying. Tell your 31-year-old daughter to put on her big girl pants and come say goodbye." "Don't be so dramatic and judgmental," he snapped. "Gia is grieving in her own way. She's taking a short trip to Cabo with some friends to clear her head and process this trauma. We need you to just hold down the fort." He hung up before I could reply. I stared at the phone. My grandmother was suffocating in a hospital bed, my parents were avoiding the hospital because it smelled like death, and my sister was flying to Mexico to drink margaritas on a beach. 2 days later, as I sat next to Grandma's bed at midnight, wiping the sweat from her forehead with a damp cloth, my phone buzzed. It was an Instagram notification. Someone had tagged me in a post. I opened the app. It was Gia. She had posted a black and white, highly filtered photo. It showed Gia's perfectly manicured hand gently holding Grandma Odette's wrinkled hand, resting on white hospital sheets. The caption was a masterpiece of narcissistic fiction. It read, "Holding on to my anchor. Anchor spending these final, precious moments with my beautiful grandmother. The hospital is so cold, but my love for her keeps me warm. Thank you to everyone sending me prayers during this devastating tragedy. I haven't slept in days, just sitting by her side. Please respect my family's privacy right now. #family first, #grief, #unbreakable bond." In the comments, dozens of people were praising her strength. "You are such an amazing granddaughter, Gia." One wrote. "She is so lucky to have you holding her hand right now," wrote another. I sat in the dim light of the ICU, reading the lies, feeling a cold, calculating rage wash over me. I didn't comment on the post. I didn't call her out. Instead, I zoomed in on the photo. I looked very, very closely at Grandma's wrist in the picture. Around her wrist was a bright blue hospital admission band. I looked down at Grandma Odette's actual wrist resting on the bed in front of me. She was wearing a bright red allergy band. She had been wearing a red band since she was admitted 2 weeks ago because of a new reaction to penicillin. The photo Gia posted was fake. Well, not fake, but recycled. It was a picture she had taken 3 years ago when Grandma was admitted for a minor gallbladder issue, the one and only time Gia had visited her in a hospital for exactly 20 minutes. She had saved the photo, put a black and white filter on it, and posted it from a beach resort in Cabo to farm sympathy likes. I carefully took a screenshot of the post. I took a screenshot of the date it was posted. Then, I took a live photo of Grandma's hand in front of me, clearly showing the red allergy band and the date and time on the monitor in the background. I locked my phone and slipped it into my pocket. As I sat there holding her frail hand, I knew the truth. Gia was building a narrative of the devoted, heartbroken granddaughter. She was laying the groundwork to look like the rightful, grieving heir. But I had the receipts. And the reckoning was coming faster than any of them realized. The end came quietly, but the preparations for the aftermath were executed with military precision. It was a Tuesday night, close to 11 p.m. The hospital was eerily quiet, the corridors empty except for the occasional nurse doing rounds. Grandma Odette had been drifting in and out of consciousness all day. The doctors told me her organs were shutting down. It was a matter of hours. I was sitting in my usual plastic chair, my head resting on the edge of her bed, when the heavy door to the ICU room clicked open. I lifted my head, expecting a nurse. Instead, in walked a tall, imposing man in a pristine charcoal suit, carrying a thick leather briefcase. He looked entirely out of place in the sterile hospital environment. It was Mr. Carmichael, Grandma's attorney of over 30 years. He didn't look sad. He looked focused. He walked over to the bed. Miraculously, Grandma Odette's eyes fluttered open. For a brief moment, the fog of the morphine lifted, and her eyes were sharp, bright, and terrifyingly lucid. "You brought the documents, Arthur," she whispered, her voice like dry leaves scraping against pavement. "Everything is prepared exactly to your specifications, Odette," Mr. Carmichael replied softly, pulling a thick stack of papers from his briefcase. He also pulled out a small, digital video recorder and set it on the bedside table. Grandma Odette turned her head slightly to look at me. "Nadia," she said, her tone suddenly shifting to a strict command. "I need you to step out into the hallway. Go get a cup of coffee. Do not come back in until Arthur tells you." "Grandma, I don't want to leave you." I started, panic rising in my chest. "Do as I say, girl," she interrupted, a hint of her old fire sparking in her eyes. "This is the final move on the board. You cannot be in the room. You cannot be a witness. It has to be airtight." I swallowed the lump in my throat, nodded, and walked out of the room. I stood in the desolate hallway for 45 minutes, clutching a cup of terrible machine coffee. I watched through the narrow glass window in the door. I saw Mr. Carmichael bring in a duty nurse and a doctor. I saw him turn on the video camera. I saw the doctor speak to Grandma, likely assessing her mental capacity. And then I saw her frail hand, guided by fierce determination, sign document after document. When Mr. Carmichael finally stepped out, he looked exhausted but satisfied. He gave me a brief, curt nod. "It is done, Nadia. Go back to her." I rushed back to her side. The energy it took to sign the papers had drained whatever life she had left. She was breathing shallowly now, her eyes closed. I held her hand, crying silently, letting the tears fall for the first time in weeks. "Don't cry for me, little bird," she whispered without opening her eyes. "I'm tired. It's time." She squeezed my hand one last time. "Don't let them take your light. Let them show the world exactly who they are." Grandma Odette passed away at 3:15 in the morning. I was the one who had to make the phone calls. I called my parents at 4 a.m. My mother answered, groggy and irritated. When I told her Grandma was gone, she didn't gasp. She didn't cry. There was a brief silence on the line, and then she said, "Oh. Well, we knew it was coming." "Did she suffer?" "No," I said coldly. "Okay. I'll text Gia when she wakes up." "Listen, Nadia. Did the hospital mention anything about her personal effects? Her keys? We need to secure the house immediately before squatters or something get in." My grandmother hadn't been dead for an hour. Her body was still warm in the hospital bed, and my mother was already asking for the keys to her real estate. "The hospital has her things," I lied smoothly. "I'm going home to sleep." The days leading up to the funeral were a whirlwind of fake grief. Gia flew back from Cabo with a fresh tan, immediately throwing on black designer clothes and playing the role of the shattered granddaughter. My parents spent the wake shaking hands, receiving condolences, and dropping loud, unsubtle hints to relatives about how stressed they were about managing the estate and taking on the burden of selling the Sycamore Lane property. They were so confident. They had spent their entire lives manipulating the narrative, bullying me into submission, and writing their own reality. They truly believed that because they were the parents, they held all the power. They thought I was just the quiet, obedient workhorse who would step aside and let them loot the corpse of the woman I loved. They thought wrong. 3 days after we buried Grandma in the sweltering heat, my father sent a group text demanding we meet at Mr. Carmichael's office for the reading of the will. He treated it like a victory lap. He told me to come straight from work because this shouldn't take long. As I drove my cheap, used sedan toward the downtown law offices, I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. The anxiety that had plagued me for my entire adult life was gone. I walked into the lobby, took the elevator up to the mahogany-paneled office of Mr. Carmichael, and breathed in the scent of expensive leather and impending doom. The battlefield was set. The parasites were gathered, hungry for their feast. The real war was about to begin. If you're enjoying this story of family betrayal and long-awaited justice, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment below telling me which city you are watching from. Every single comment helps push this video to more people who love a good revenge story. Thank you so much for your support. Now, let's get back to the reading of the will. Mr. Carmichael's law office smelled exactly like you would expect a place of serious business to smell. Old paper, polished leather, and the faint, intimidating scent of expensive floor wax. It was a room designed to make you feel small, but as I walked in, I felt 10 feet tall. I was the first to arrive. I was dressed in my work clothes, a sharp, tailored navy blue pantsuit. I sat quietly in one of the high-backed leather chairs, my briefcase resting on the floor next to me, completely silent. 10 minutes later, the door swung open, and my family paraded in. They didn't look like a family in mourning. They looked like people walking into a casino to cash out a winning lottery ticket. My father, Donovan, strode in first, shaking Mr. Carmichael's hand with the aggressive firmness of a man who thinks he owns the room. My mother, Helena, followed closely behind, carrying a designer handbag that probably cost more than my first car. And then there was Gia. My 31-year-old sister collapsed into the chair next to me with a loud, theatrical sigh. She was wearing cropped designer jeans and a cashmere sweater, her phone already in her hand. She didn't even look at me. She just started texting furiously, her thumbs flying across the screen. "Thank you for making time for us today, Arthur," Dad said, taking the seat at the center of the mahogany table. He spoke with a jovial, confident tone. "I know these legal formalities can be tedious, but we are eager to get everything sorted out so we can begin the grieving process in peace." "Of course, Donovan," Mr. Carmichael replied neutrally, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. He didn't offer condolences. He didn't smile. He just opened a thick, cream-colored file folder on his desk. While Mr. Carmichael was sorting the papers, my parents started whispering. They weren't even trying to hide their conversation from me. They thought I didn't matter. "I called the real estate agent this morning," Dad whispered to Mom, leaning in. "He said the market in that neighborhood is red hot right now. If we list Sycamore Lane by next week, we could easily get over $600,000 for it." "We need to clear out her old junk first," Mom whispered back, wrinkling her nose. "We can just hire a junk removal company to take everything to the dump. I don't want to spend my weekend sorting through old knitting supplies and dusty photo albums. Once the house is sold, we can finally pay off the boutique loan, and Gia can use some of the cash to put a down payment on that luxury condo downtown." I sat perfectly still, listening to them casually plan to throw my grandmother's entire life into a dumpster to fund my sister's lavish lifestyle. They were dividing up the spoils of a war they hadn't even fought. "All right, let us begin," Mr. Carmichael said, his voice cutting through their greedy whispers like a knife. The room went silent. Gia actually put her phone down, suddenly very interested in what was about to happen. "I have here the last will and testament of Odette Marie Sterling," Mr. Carmichael began, reading from the official document. "Being of sound mind and body, she has left explicit instructions regarding the entirety of her estate." Dad leaned forward, a greedy smirk playing on his lips. "Skip the legal jargon, Arthur. Let's just get to the property." Mr. Carmichael paused. He looked at my father over the rim of his glasses for a long, uncomfortable moment. "As you wish," he said coldly. He flipped to the third page of the document. "Regarding the primary residence located at 445 Sycamore Lane and all its contents, financial assets, and adjoining properties." My mother held her breath. Gia leaned forward. "I do hereby bequeath 100% of said estate, free and clear of any mortgages or liens, to my granddaughter, Nadia." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the kind of silence that happens right after a bomb goes off, before the shockwave hits and the screaming begins. For 3 agonizing seconds, nobody moved. The air in the room seemed to freeze. Then, Gia's phone clattered onto the mahogany table. Her perfectly glossed mouth fell open in an ugly, slack-jawed expression of pure shock. "What?" she shrieked, her voice cracking. Dad shot up from his chair so fast it scraped violently against the hardwood floor. "Read that again," he demanded, his face instantly turning a dark, dangerous shade of purple. "There is a mistake. She meant me. I am her son." "There is no mistake, Donovan," Mr. Carmichael said, his voice as calm and steady as a ticking clock. "The will is quite clear. The house, all its contents, and the remaining bank accounts go directly and solely to Nadia." "But that is completely ridiculous," Mom screeched, her voice pitching so high it hurt my ears. She started gesturing frantically, her heavy gold bracelets clinking together. Why would she leave a massive house to her? Nadia is single. She lives in a tiny apartment. She doesn't need a house like that. Mom turned her glaring eyes toward me, pointing a manicured finger. "Gia needs that house. She has been struggling. She has severe anxiety. She is trying to find herself and build her spiritual business. How can she do that without a stable home?" I looked at my mother, feeling absolutely nothing but cold, clinical detachment. "I have a job, Mom," I corrected her quietly. "And I live in a studio apartment that I share with 2 roommates because I pay my own bills. I don't recall anyone worrying about my stability." Dad slammed his heavy fist onto the table. The sound echoed in the room, making Mom and Gia jump. But I didn't flinch. I just stared back at him. "Don't be a selfish brat, Nadia," Dad snarled, leaning over the table to intimidate me, a tactic he had used my entire life. "Your grandmother was clearly confused at the end. She was heavily medicated. She made a mistake, but we are going to fix it right now." He turned to the lawyer. "Arthur, print out a deed transfer document immediately." Then he turned his furious eyes back to me. This was the moment. This was the exact dynamic they had used when I was 20 years old, terrified, and holding my textbook money. "You are going to sign that house over to your sister today," Dad ordered, not asking, but commanding. "You are going to sign the deed over to Gia. She needs it more than you do. We are a family, and family helps family." He stood to his full height, puffing out his chest. "If you refuse, if you try to keep this house for yourself and leave your sister out in the cold, I want you to understand the consequences. You will be disowned. You will no longer be welcome in our house. You will lose your family, Nadia. Do you understand me? Sign it over or else." A year ago, those words would have devastated me. The threat of losing my family, even a toxic one, used to be my biggest fear. I used to crave their approval so desperately that I would set myself on fire just to keep them warm. But sitting in that leather chair, looking at the man who had stolen my college savings to buy off a drunk driving charge for his favorite child, I didn't feel fear. I didn't feel devastated. I felt free. The threat of "or else" held no power over a woman who had already realized she was completely alone. I didn't cry. I didn't lower my head. I didn't beg for their understanding. Instead, I looked at my father's red, furious face and I smiled. It wasn't the fake, polite smile I had perfected over 28 years of miserable family dinners. It wasn't the smile I used when Mom told our relatives that Gia was just between creative opportunities while ignoring my recent promotion. This smile was real, sharp, and predatory. It felt like putting on a suit of armor. "Family helps family," I repeated softly, letting the words roll around in my mouth like a bitter candy. "That is a fascinating philosophy, Dad." "Really?" I stood up slowly, smoothing the wrinkles from my suit jacket. Where was that philosophy when I was working 3 jobs, smelling like deep fryer grease, to pay for my community college classes? Where was that philosophy when you forced me to drain my bank account to pay for Gia's lawyer after she crashed her car? Gia let out a loud, dramatic sob, burying her face in her hands. "I can't believe you are bringing that up now. I was traumatized by that accident." "You are so vindictive." I ignored her completely and turned my gaze to my mother. "Where was that philosophy, Mom, when I spent every single Sunday for 10 solid years driving 2 hours each way to help Grandma Odette? I bought her groceries. I organized her pills. I fixed her porch in the freezing rain. Where was Gia? Oh, right. She was at a luxury spa detoxing her negative energy on your credit card. How dare you? Mom gasped, clutching her chest as if she were having a heart attack. How dare you speak to your parents and your sister this way? We gave you life. You gave me a life, and then you expected me to spend it subsidizing hers. I shot back, my voice never rising to a yell, but cutting through the room with absolute precision. I am not signing over the house, I stated clearly, looking my father dead in the eye. I am not giving you a dime. And I am certainly not handing over the one thing someone gave me out of love, just so you can sell it to pay off the $80,000 debt from Gia's failed crystal shop. My parents froze. Their eyes went wide. They had no idea I knew the exact amount of their debt, or the real reason they wanted to sell Sycamore Lane. The color drained from Dad's face. Gia jumped up from her chair, her fake tears vanishing instantly, replaced by a mask of pure, spoiled rage. You manipulated her, she screamed, pointing her phone at me like a weapon. You brainwashed Grandma. You turned her against us because you have always been jealous of me. Jealous of what, Gia? I asked calmly, tilting my head. Your 5 failed business ventures? Your mountain of credit card debt? Your complete inability to hold down a job or wake up before noon. Before Gia could scream again, I reached into my leather briefcase. Actually, I said, my voice echoing in the quiet room. Grandma Odette left something else. She asked me to read it if this exact situation arose. And knowing you all as well as she did, she knew exactly what you would say. I pulled out a thick cream envelope. My name was written across it in Grandma's spidery, elegant handwriting. Mom lunged forward across the table, trying to snatch the envelope out of my hands. Give me that. It's probably fake. Sit down, Helena. Mr. Carmichael's voice cracked like a whip. He stood up from his desk, his presence suddenly terrifying. The deceased left very specific, legally binding instructions regarding that letter. You will sit down and you will listen, or I will have security remove you from this building. Mom slowly sank back into her chair, trembling with rage and fear. I broke the wax seal on the envelope, unfolded the thick paper, and prepared to deliver a message from the grave. My hands were perfectly steady. The room was so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning vent above us. I looked down at the familiar handwriting of the woman who had saved my sanity, took a deep breath, and began to read aloud. To my family. I am dead, which means I can finally speak freely without having to listen to Helena's insufferable whining or Donovan's arrogant posturing. Gia gasped loudly. Dad's jaw dropped. I didn't pause. If you are hearing this, it means you have just demanded that Nadia hand over her inheritance to Gia. I knew you would. You have been taking from my youngest granddaughter her entire life to pad the comfortable, useless existence of my eldest. Donovan, Helena, you have failed miserably as parents. You took a brilliant, hard-working daughter and tried to dim her light so your other daughter could shine. It didn't work. Gia is 31 years old and utterly useless, not because the universe is unfair to her, but because you never allowed her to fail. You cushioned every fall, funded every foolish whim, and excused every ounce of her laziness. I glanced up for a fraction of a second. Mom was weeping now, real tears of deep, stinging humiliation. Dad was gripping the armrests of his chair so hard his knuckles were white. I continued reading. You want to know why I am leaving everything to Nadia? Because she is the only one who loved me, not my money. The house on Sycamore Lane has been a sanctuary for 60 years. It will stay with someone who values family beyond what she can extract from it. Nadia earned this house through love, not blood. Every Sunday visit, every grocery run, every flower she planted in my garden while Gia was too busy to pick up a phone. Nadia is my true heir. If you contest this will, you will find out just how thoroughly I have prepared. Stand firm, my brave girl. All my love, Grandma Odette. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back into my briefcase. The silence was deafening. The truth had just been dragged out into the harsh fluorescent light of the law office, and it was ugly. Dad was the first to recover. The humiliation quickly morphed into explosive, defensive anger. He stood up, towering over the table. This is absolute garbage, he spat, pointing an accusing finger at Mr. Carmichael. This is manipulation. That girl, he pointed at me, spent months whispering lies into my mother's ear. My mother was sick. She was on heavy painkillers. She didn't know what she was writing or signing. He slammed his hand on the table again. We are going to contest this will, Arthur. I am going to tie this estate up in probate court for the next 10 years if I have to. I will sue for elder abuse, undue influence, and mental incompetence. Nadia won't see a single penny of that house. He looked at me with pure hatred. You pushed too far this time, you little thief. Mr. Carmichael didn't look worried. He didn't look intimidated by my father's threats. Instead, he just sighed, a long, tired sound, and reached for a small remote control on his desk. I warned you, Donovan, the lawyer said quietly. Odette told me you would threaten litigation based on mental incompetence, which is why she instructed me to present you with Exhibit A. Mr. Carmichael pressed a button on the remote. A large flat-screen television mounted on the wall behind him clicked on. Before we get to the video, let us address the medical claims, Mr. Carmichael said, sliding a thick document across the table toward my father. This is a comprehensive psychological and cognitive evaluation performed by Dr. Eris Thorne, a board-certified geriatric psychiatrist. Dad stared at the paper confused. When was this done? It was conducted at 11:30 p.m. in the intensive care unit, precisely 30 minutes before Odette signed her final will, Mr. Carmichael stated. Dr. Thorne certified, on the record and under oath, that Odette was 100% lucid, fully aware of her assets, and completely firm in her decision to exclude Gia from the estate. Good luck finding a judge to throw out a same-day psychiatric clearance, Donovan. Mom's face turned completely ashen. She knew they couldn't afford a prolonged legal battle, especially one they were guaranteed to lose. But Mr. Carmichael wasn't finished. Now, the lawyer continued, regarding the accusations that Nadia manipulated Odette by isolating her, Odette requested I show you the data log from the security system she had installed at Sycamore Lane 10 years ago. Specifically, the front and back door Ring cameras. Mr. Carmichael clicked a button on his laptop, and a spreadsheet appeared on the television screen. It was an exhaustive, color-coded log of every single time a face was recognized by the cameras over a 10-year period. I have compiled the data, Mr. Carmichael announced, his voice ringing with absolute authority. Over the past 3,650 days, Nadia appeared on these cameras 507 times, usually carrying groceries, medical supplies, or hardware tools. The average duration of her visits was 6 hours. He scrolled down the screen, revealing a pathetically small second column. Your golden child, Gia, Mr. Carmichael said, not even trying to hide his disdain, appeared on the cameras exactly 12 times in 10 years. The average duration of her visits was 42 minutes, almost exclusively around the holidays, and she never arrived carrying anything. I watched my sister shrink back into her chair. The hard data was staring her in the face, completely destroying her narrative of the loving, devoted granddaughter. This proves nothing. Gia shrieked suddenly, her voice cracking with desperation. I didn't visit her at the house because it's too far. But I was at the hospital. I visited her in the ICU constantly. I was the one holding her hand while she was dying. Nadia is just trying to erase me. Gia pulled her phone out, aggressively tapping the screen. I have proof. I posted a picture of me holding Grandma's hand in the hospital just a few weeks ago. Thousands of people saw it. That was it. That was the moment I had been waiting for since that lonely, freezing night in the ICU. She had walked right into the trap. I calmly slid my own phone across the polished mahogany table, stopping it right in front of my father. Take a very close look at that picture, Dad, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerously quiet tone. Look at the blue hospital band on Grandma's wrist. Dad picked up my phone, squinting at the screen. Mom leaned over his shoulder, her brow furrowed in confusion. So what? Mom snapped. It's a blue band. It proves Gia was there. Now swipe left, I instructed coldly. Dad swiped his finger across the screen. The next photo appeared. It was the live photo I had taken sitting by Grandma's bed. It clearly showed the hospital room, the date and time illuminated on the heart monitor in the background, and Grandma's hand resting on the bed. During her final stay in the ICU, Grandma Odette had a severe allergic reaction to penicillin, I explained, watching the realization slowly dawn on my parents' faces. The hospital protocol for severe allergies requires a bright red wristband. She wore that red band every single day for the last month of her life. I pointed at Gia, who was suddenly looking very pale. The picture Gia posted with the blue band is 3 years old. It was from the one time she visited Grandma for 20 minutes when she had her gallbladder removed. Gia didn't visit the ICU, I continued, my voice echoing in the silent room. Gia was in Cabo San Lucas, Mexico, drinking margaritas on a beach, posting fake, recycled photos to farm sympathy on the internet while I watched our grandmother slowly suffocate to death. Dad turned his head slowly to look at Gia. For the first time in my life, I saw the absolute delusion break in his eyes. He looked at his favorite daughter, the one he had bankrupted his future for, and saw her for exactly what she was, a fraud. "Is this true, Gia?" Dad asked, his voice suddenly sounding very old and very tired. Gia burst into frantic, ugly tears. I couldn't handle the hospital. It's too depressing. My therapist said I needed to protect my peace. You guys always said my mental health comes first. She tried to grab Mom's hand, but Mom actually pulled away, staring at Gia in horror. The grand illusion was shattered. The golden child was exposed, the parents' financial desperation was laid bare, and I held the keys to the kingdom. Dad slowly put my phone down on the table. He stood up, avoiding my gaze completely. He looked defeated, but his pride would never allow him to apologize. "Keep the house, Nadia," he said, his voice a hoarse, venomous whisper. "Keep the money. But don't ever call us again. Don't show up at our door. As far as I am concerned, I only have one daughter now." He was disowning me. The ultimate punishment. I stood up, snapped my briefcase shut, and looked at the man who had tormented me for years. "Dad," I said softly, causing him to pause at the door. "You only ever had one daughter to begin with. You just chose the wrong one." I turned to Mr. Carmichael and extended my hand. "Thank you, Arthur. Grandma spoke very highly of you." He shook my hand firmly, a rare, genuine smile crossing his weathered face. "She spoke highly of you too, Nadia. The keys to Sycamore Lane are in the file. The property is yours, free and clear." I gathered my things and prepared to leave. But as I walked past my sobbing sister and my stunned mother, I stopped. I had one final piece of business to conduct. I looked down at Gia, who was practically hyperventilating in her chair. Her luxury clothing suddenly looked ridiculous, like a costume on a terrible actor who had just forgotten all her lines. "You know, Gia," I said casually, adjusting the strap of my briefcase on my shoulder. "Since your crystal boutique failed and Mom and Dad are drowning in the second mortgage they took out for you, I imagine things are going to get pretty tight at home." Gia looked up at me, her mascara running down her cheeks, her eyes filled with venom. "Shut up," she hissed. "Just take your stupid house and leave me alone." "I am leaving," I replied calmly. "But I just wanted to let you know that the Sycamore Lane property has a very nice, detached mother-in-law suite in the back garden. I don't really need the extra space, so I'll be renting it out." My mother's head snapped up. A glimmer of desperate hope actually flashed in her eyes. Even after everything that had just happened, she still thought I would cave. She still thought I would offer my sister a free place to live. "I'll be putting it on the market next week," I continued, smiling sweetly at my sister. "Market rate in that area is $1,500 a month. But since we are family, I'll let you skip the open house and apply directly." Gia's mouth fell open. "Apply?" "Of course," I nodded. "You'll just need to provide proof of income showing you make 3 times the rent, first and last month's deposit, and a credit score over 700. I leaned in just a fraction, lowering my voice so only she could hear the absolute finality in it. "You know, standard adult stuff." Gia let out a scream of pure, unadulterated frustration. It wasn't a sad cry, it was a toddler's tantrum. She threw her phone at the wall, shattering the screen, and buried her face in her arms. "You are a monster." Mom screamed at me, wrapping her arms around Gia. "You are dead to us." "I know," I said, turning my back on them for the last time. "And it feels fantastic." I walked out of the mahogany office, took the elevator down to the lobby, and stepped out into the bustling city street. The sun was shining. The humidity had broken. For the first time in 28 years, I took a deep breath that didn't feel heavy with obligation. I drove straight to Sycamore Lane. When I unlocked the front door, the house smelled exactly like I remembered: lavender, old wood, and lemon polish. It was completely silent, but it wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. I walked through the living room, running my hand over the back of Grandma's favorite armchair. But the story didn't end there. Because Grandma Odette had left one final instruction in her letter, a postscript that I hadn't read out loud in the lawyer's office. It said, "Check the loose floorboard in the attic, little bird. I left you the seed for your future." Fast forward 6 months. My parents, driven by pride and desperation, actually tried to sue me. They hired a cheap lawyer and tried to contest the will on the grounds of elder abuse. The judge took one look at the psychiatric evaluation, watched 5 minutes of the security camera footage, and threw the case out with prejudice. He not only upheld Grandma's wishes, but ordered my parents to pay all of my legal fees for wasting the court's time. The financial strain finally broke them. They had to sell their massive suburban home at a loss to cover the boutique debt and the legal fees. They downsized to a cramped, 2-bedroom apartment near the highway. Gia, of course, moved right in with them. She is currently 31 years old, sleeping on an air mattress in their living room, still complaining about her anxiety and trying to become a lifestyle influencer on TikTok. We haven't spoken since the day in the lawyer's office. And my life has never been better. That first day I walked into Sycamore Lane, I went straight up to the dusty attic. I found the loose floorboard Grandma had mentioned. Underneath, it was an old metal lockbox. Inside the box was a letter and a cashier's check made out to me for $50,000. The letter simply read, "I saved this over the years by refusing to give your father money for his foolish investments. Use it to buy your freedom. Start your own firm. Build your own empire." And that is exactly what I did. I quit my exhausting corporate job. I converted the front living room of Sycamore Lane into a beautiful home office, and I started my own freelance accounting firm. I rented the mother-in-law suite to a lovely retired nurse who helps me tend to the garden and pays her rent on time every single month. I sit on the front porch every Sunday morning, drinking black tea, looking at the rose bushes I planted with Grandma Odette. I don't feel guilty. I don't feel sorry for my family. I realized that the greatest inheritance Grandma Odette left me wasn't the house or the money in the attic. It was the strength to finally walk away. She gave me the permission to stop trying to heal people who were perfectly happy watching me bleed. Some people will tell you that family is everything. They will tell you that no matter how toxic, no matter how abusive, you have to forgive and forget because blood is thicker than water. But I learned the hard way that blood is just a biological accident. Love is measured in who shows up for you in the freezing rain and who sits by your side in the dark. I showed up for Grandma, and she showed up for me. So, I have to ask you, am I wrong for keeping the house, letting my family hit rock bottom financially, and treating my 31-year-old sister like a standard tenant instead of family? Or was it time to finally stop paying the family tax? Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that button now to join our community, and drop your verdict in the comments below. See you in the next story.